as well. Welcome on Face. And I have one more adjustment to make. There we go. I'm sorry about that. We are getting started just a couple minutes late today, but I want to begin by saying welcome. I am Dr. Alana McLaughlin. I'm a naturopathic doctor and bridging what we know with where we want to get to. So a lot of you out there who are following me have a great history. You know some about herbs, you know some about movement and nutrition and all the things, essential oils, but we need to put it all together into something we can manage. So that is my goal during this challenge, is to get everybody rolling. So it's beautiful outside here. It has been the last couple days as spring is finally here. And I know some of you may still be having some winter storms. Some of you already have like the beautiful weather, but it's very exciting time of year, right? It is really a time of year of change and growth and putting things in the ground and, planting those seeds and waiting for the beauty that gets to come out of it, whether it's food or flowers. And it's also a time within our bodies to say, okay, winter is in Chinese medicine the time of kidneys. It's damp, it's cool, cooler. And we can say, even if you live in a warm place, it's generally the same there too, right? We generally have that shift in seasons. So we are shifting into springtime, which is in Chinese medicine again, is wood, is like this green and growth and like this upward momentum that we have been storing this energy and building this energy inside all winter. And now we get to create something beautiful. And for a lot of people, it's energy, right? We've had this kind of darkness. We've had more darkness during our days, and now it's time to be able to go out and explore, maybe be outside longer. It's warmer, it's more comfortable, and there's trails to explore. There's so many things to do, right? So the goal of this is to get everybody kick-started. And I will begin by introducing the challenge. So what I would love for all of you, though, all of you who are following this, is two challenges, and maybe you do both. Maybe you only pick one. One is going to be a repeat of what we did in December. And if anybody's on and knows what that is, what did we do in December as the challenge? We did a 5-day sugar-free challenge. So that is reading your ingredients. So I included in that eat fruit, eat, whole pieces, whole food is perfect. It's then when we take something, if it's coming out of a package, just scanning that label or out of a bottle and seeing and noticing where sugar is in our food. Maybe it's a different thing that you're looking at, but sugar is definitely a big one that we can notice a significant shift in our bodies right away. Maybe the couple days into it, it might get hard. We might get cravings. We might really feel like we need whatever it is. If you're a coffee drinker, maybe you have it with a sweetener in it. Maybe it is substituting something else for that sweetener, something like honey or agave, pure maple syrup, that are still sweet, but it's not processed sugar. You can also be the extreme and not do any kind of sweeteners with it as well. So I'm curious where people are at and what you choose. This makes a huge difference on our digestion, on how we're feeling, water weight. Oftentimes you'll notice a shift there as well. So that's the first challenge. The other option, or both, is movement. So encouraging you to get some movement outside every single day. Some people, this might be going for a run or a bike ride or going out. Maybe the water's open and kayaking already. Maybe it's just a hike, not just a hike, because there's varying levels. We still have snow on our mountains, so there's not much hiking yet, but there are trails opening to where there's more opportunity. And other people, maybe it's just walking around the house or walking to the mailbox or even just sitting outside with your feet on the ground outside. So I think the outside part is the most important part. And I'll say personal experience is it gets really easy with busy schedules and up here, snow, even though we had a milder winter, is that it gets comfortable to be inside, to get to just go through the things inside. And we don't realize sometimes how tired that is making us when we're inside these walls with nowadays Wi-Fi moving throughout our homes for almost everybody, and how much that can change your actual body's ability to regulate energy and to feel, that motivation, that want to go outside into something that's less comfortable, whether it's a little bit cooler or whatnot. So I challenge you to get outside. And I'm curious, set your own personal goal. Maybe it's just 5 minutes sitting outside with your feet on the ground. And that's perfect. Just notice how you feel before and after. So I mentioned this as personal experience because this weekend we haven't been outside much because I spent a lot of time at the ice rink. With my kids playing hockey, I started doing my workouts there, which was great. I could move my body. But this weekend, I finally had a day where nothing was scheduled. And so I just had my two little boys with me. I was like, all right, I put it in my mind. I was like, we're going to go outside. Even on Saturday, I was like, I don't know, am I really going to do it? And so I told a friend that I was going to do it on Sunday so that I'd have accountability. And then we did. And it's a bit of a struggle because I have two bigger dogs that have like energy that aren't on leash as much. And my two youngest boys were with me. So there were times where like, oh my gosh, this is a lot of work to get everybody to the trail, all their gear on, there's still snow on it, and a sled involved and the dogs pulling. And so I was like, okay, parts of it was like, okay, breathe, enjoy, look at the mountains. And then it felt good. And when we all got home, everybody, the dogs were calmer, the boys were calmer, like they were kinder to each other. I felt more energized. So actually, when I got home, way more productive. Finished the hanging up the coat rack that I'd been wanting to do forever for my littles to be able to just hang up their own coats on a level where they can reach it, and putting a closet bar up for my daughter who moved rooms upstairs, and airing out the bedding, like hanging it outside. So it really felt like spring. The day was perfect. And I say this because otherwise I don't know that I would have been as productive. So I'm generally energized, and you guys can probably equate. I'd love to see comments. But to where you feel good and you're energized until you have something that shifts you even more, and you realize, okay, I am ready to move up to be energized and recharged. So that's my introduction. My two challenges for this week. I want to see who can go through all 5 days, no sugar, and then moving or getting outside, at least if it's not actual movement. And you can decide, maybe it is more the movement part, but ideally moving outside or like getting grounded outside and seeing the difference that it makes for you. So we also, for those who are on and followed on Friday, I did the introduction again on labs. And we started off with just looking at a component of the CBC with differential and some from the complete metabolic panel. This might be foreign, new language for you. Some people look at their labs often and it's familiar. So if it's not, these are two labs that are generally run if you're doing regular annual exams with your primary care. These are generally two that they're going to be checking. You already have the numbers, and maybe everything on here says normal, but you don't feel quite normal. There's something still there, or maybe you do know that something's off. There's a couple values off. This can give even more information on how to get where you are to where you want to be, to being that energized, being able to do everything that you want to do, especially as we go into springtime, into summertime. So the lab parts, I would love to go through if people have specific questions. What are your questions? What are your labs that are maybe out of a certain range? And I also have this form that I can send over if you message me, and what you can do then is put in your lab values into the sheet, and then it's going to have a comment section that will give you an idea of what those values indicate or what give you pieces to the puzzle. For example, last week I mentioned the glucose and hemoglobin A1C, which are two markers that give us an idea of blood sugar regulation. And I gave kind of a hint of this, that it usually means something more than just there's something than what you're eating. Some people, it is high sugar or high carbohydrate intake, and that can be affecting these labs. But I've also seen it in people that eat really well and they eat very clean. But sometimes it's they're not eating frequently enough. Sometimes there is stress involved, which is most people, right? And sometimes it's emotional stress. Sometimes it's something happening in your body, like those low-grade infections we talked about in the CBC part of it. Sometimes it's if one of your organ systems, like if your liver is not quite working right, and this is spring is the time of the liver where we're cleansing, we're clearing things out, kind of like in our homes too, right? Perfect time to do spring cleaning, like clearing out, dusting, getting rid of things that maybe it's clothing, winter clothes that aren't going to fit kids anymore, or airing out the bedding. Same thing in the body, like it's your liver's time to like energize. This is its time of year to help clear out, to work more efficiently and better for us. So this is a great time of year to do things like a cleanse that helps support and nourish our body's ability to eliminate things that have maybe been building up. And we can see that if we're looking through our lab panel. So I'm not going to go in order on today's like I have in some of my prior recordings, but if you're wondering about liver, as we're looking through, and my numbers are in different order than some, but we get to a section, usually it's after the kidneys, and we'll see looking at some electrolytes, and we get to some total protein, albumin, then usually there's globulin ratio. Bilirubin is one that many people have heard, because if bilirubin gets really high, we actually start to see like a yellowing in our eyes or even on our skin. And this one is relating to liver and gallbladder, of how well that's working. Gallbladder, since I mentioned that as we're thinking about it, is oftentimes comes up in women who are getting into their 30 to 50 range and will start having things going on with gallbladder. And the big role of gallbladder is that it helps us break down our fat. So it breaks it into, like, if you think of like an oil blob on water, and it's a nice big chunk together. So our gallbladder helps, and it's like when you poke that bubble on water and it like makes it spread into tinier little bubbles. Kind of what the gallbladder is doing. It's taking any big fat chunks, breaking them up so that then we can either absorb what we need and get rid of what we don't need. So what we'll see oftentimes is not digesting fats very well, is like a sluggishness, or like it can even be painful. So up on your liver, if you're using your right hand, up underneath your rib cage on that right side, and you kind of curl your fingers underneath your rib cage. And as you get closer to the middle, that's closer to where our gallbladder is, and then the liver is going to be this whole other section of the underneath the rib cage on the right. So you can see, if you curl your fingers under, is there any tenderness in there? Sometimes there is, sometimes there not. But if there is, or we can feel our liver coming out, then we're like, okay, how can we support this organ? Things like castor oil packs can be simple. Herbs like milk thistle, and there's so many good ones. If we're doing garlic, if we're doing cleanses that support, beetroot is a really good one. So we can do things naturally, and there are formulas out there that will help us, but it's about kind of knowing what you're doing as well throughout the process. So the other ones on here, as we're going through talking about liver and gallbladder, since I mentioned it, if you're wondering if there's something going on, alkaline phosphatase, LDH, AST, ALT, and the GGTP are generally the ones we're going to be thinking liver and what might be going on in there, if they're high levels or low levels, and then what does that tell us? So the overall functioning is going to give us other clues as well, though. If something's happening in this liver part, then generally I will also check and look at the iron panel and see, how does our iron panel look, which will oftentimes all we get is an iron. Sometimes, I'm going to mute my phone here. Other times, all we get is sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Going back, is just the iron on the panel. If there is something that warrants or that indicates that we might have low iron, then oftentimes a provider will put on an iron panel, which will get ferritin, TIBC, UIBC, the saturation, transferrin, and these are going to give us more information on whether we are not getting enough iron, whether we have too much iron. And if there's liver things happening and too much iron, then those correlate into what's happening in our body. The third piece, if there's something going on with liver, is I check the cholesterol panel or the lipids. So lipids are going to be your cholesterol, your triglycerides, HDL, LDL. Sometimes they'll also have a VLDL and then the ratio in there. And this is too going to give me a clue as to how well your body is processing fats. And I mentioned fats already once, gallbladder. So it just gives us more information on where the stress is coming from on the body. And I'm tying all of this together because I mentioned stress up ahead on our blood sugar, that sometimes it's a system that's out of sync, causing that cortisol or that stress response that then impacts the blood sugar. So if you're tracking where I'm going, is that everything in here is usually related, that we get different clues going throughout the labs, and it helps us put the pieces together to know where to begin. So that was just kind of an example of how one marker looking at another couple can help me put the picture together. The other one, if we're thinking going back to the blood sugar and cortisol, is those lipids and cholesterol particular can also be impacting our hormones, because a lot of people don't know, or some people do, and then it's putting the pieces together, that our cholesterol actually comes in, it converts into, through a series, into pregnenolone, and then that creates our estrogen, testosterones on one side, DHEA, and then, or it can convert over onto the other side into progesterone and cortisol. So they all come from the same thing though. So if there's a lot of stress happening, it's going to shift it to one side, and maybe the other hormones will not be the values where we need them to be. And especially in women, we see this a lot in progesterone, that it will be low because our cortisol keeps pulling all of it through right to cortisol for that stress response. And so I've mentioned this in other videos, but if you have questions and you're trying to figure out this whole cycle, and how we would see this, if we're thinking symptoms in life with cortisol particular, since I do a lot with stress management and sleep cycles and energy and how we manage our emotions, is seeing where's the stress coming from within our systems or within our external. How is it affecting in real life our energy? Do we have different times of day when we feel really tired, like in the afternoon or early, mid-morning? Or do we feel tired from the moment we get up? And then do we have maybe a spike of energy before bed? Or do we fall asleep easily? These are all questions that, depending how they're answered, is going to help understand the state of those systems and how much support and how we give that support to our body to help regulate it out, to help bring that cortisol back in balance, that may be what is triggering that blood sugar regulation to be off. And then how do we manage it from there? So if I'm picking just a few others, since I'm talking about hormones, we also have 3 different kind of interconnected systems in our body that feed back to each other. So I just mentioned reproductive hormones, the adrenal hormones through cortisol. The third one in there is our thyroid hormones. So depending on how all of these are working together, it has a huge impact in our energy and how we show up and how we move through our day, and when we feel energized and when we maybe feel a little bit less tired, or in what situations affect that energy that we have or don't have. So our goal though is to get where we are, right? And to always have all the energy that we need throughout every day. The thyroid, if you are wondering what this looks like for you, a lot of times labs will also have TSH, which is our thyroid stimulating hormone. And this is going to give us kind of a snapshot of how the brain is communicating with the thyroid, and then what our body is telling us to tell the thyroid to slow down or to speed up. If we're feeling tired, the TSH is going to be higher usually, because it's not giving our body enough of what it needs. And then sometimes if people have a lot of anxiousness or they sweat really easily, maybe digestion is always like going, then I'm looking at those numbers on TSH maybe in the lower range, and our thyroid is maybe too active. So we got to figure out why and what is causing that. As we're going through another big one, so that kind of ties in our three-legged stool there, and I'm looking to see on the labs, those are the big ones that I wanted to cover today. The final one that I would put in there as we're coming out of winter that I talked a lot about in December is our vitamin D. Because vitamin D is also a hormone that it's called a vitamin, but really what it does and how it interacts with the body is more like a hormone than a vitamin. And it is really important, not necessarily for the direct of how we're taking it, but our body best uses when we have sunshine that it converts over. Except that sometimes we have pathways that aren't working right and we don't convert vitamin D like we should. And if you're above a certain point living on the globe, we also don't get enough vitamin D during the day, especially during winter. So this is a great time. Get out, get some of that direct sun exposure responsibly, but that can make a huge difference in how we feel since this is all about energy. What I do is so much about energy and creating where you are to where you want to be. So that is a huge, huge tip there. I'm just checking in with that and seeing, does the sunshine help in more than one way for me? And usually it's a yes. So the sun also, if we're looking for practical tips, a great one is setting our circadian rhythm. And if you are the type of person that has a difficult time going to bed at night, is we're coming out of winter and now we're getting more direct sunlight in the morning. But throughout winter and then during summer, the first thing you want to do as soon as you open your eyes in the morning or as soon as your alarm goes off is to get some direct sunlight. If you can go outside, even better, so you're not filtered through any, some windows have like a UV filter on them. But if you can get that direct sunlight in the winter, if you have a happy light, just turn that on right away. What that does is I've talked a lot about melatonin a lot on the evening side, but in the morning when we get that direct light, it stimulates our cortisol to come up naturally. That's what kind of wakes us up, and it's a good cortisol. And that metabolizes our melatonin, which is what makes us feel sleepy, right? So we want to push down that melatonin so our cortisol can come up and wake us up and give us energy first thing in the morning. And light is one of the biggest factors for regulating that circadian rhythm so that by the end of the day, up here, as we start getting longer days in Alaska and several in the northern hemisphere here, is at night we have to need blackout curtains to then block out that light at the end of the day so that we can start calming down for the evening using more of like a yellow hue instead of any blue light, things like that. So if you are working on energy, huge tip there, use light, which is free, right, to our advantage to help give us that rhythm, that balance. All right, so that's all I'm going to say on labs, unless I have any questions. Let me see if I can see it in here. And I cannot see any right now. That doesn't mean that there aren't any in there. I still haven't figured that out, but please send me a message if you have questions on anything I've covered so far. And then our next step as we're going through, I'm just going to give a brief introduction. And so tomorrow is, as we're going through the labs, then what do we do with it? With those, as I mentioned, I'm looking for patterns. I'm looking to see what do we need to look at first that will make a big difference, like a cascade effect or a ripple effect that will then help other systems re-regulate without me having to do anything specifically different or adding in another supplement for every single thing going on. If we can find that root, then that will help the rest of the body overcome and balance out because they do talk to each other, the different systems. We're in this system, it's all working together, even though you may go to a gastroenterologist and then you go to an endocrinologist and then you go to, cardiologist. We have really separated out, but if we look at it, we can usually filter it down. And Tomorrow we'll dive deeper into it, but I wanted to do an introduction today on, as I'm looking through the labs, the only part I didn't mention was the CBC and particularly methylation, and that pertains to our hormones as well as our B vitamins, which are used for our energy, our nervous system, so many aspects, cofactors for hormones, things like that, is figuring out that root cause. Is it methylation? Is it within our mitochondria, our mucosal membranes, our cell membranes, our minerals? And there's always one I forget in the list of six. But as we're going through, we're going to target specifically which of those is the primary one we want to look at first, or maybe there's two together, but usually we keep it to one or two, and that will then help us put together the plan. The other part, though, is the system. So, is there a primary component in your body or a way your body shows up when we aren't doing well, when our energy isn't where it needs to be, when things are just out of balance? And then we can also focus on, okay, is it within the brain? Is it a whole body? We need like a whole body address. We put it together like that. Is it something with the infections or those low grade infections? Or maybe it's something with our body letting go, like through a weight release, which is more than just physical. It's like stress wise and everything. How are we letting go of things? And so those are kind of the two ways that I put it together, with those six underlying factors, and then looking at the systems to figure out where do we start and how do we do that. But prior to that, the body often needs a reset. Depending where you are, how healthily you eat every day, how much you move every day, how much you sleep every day. And that is why we bring in, and I started talking about this around summertime last year, maybe early fall, is a senolytic cleanse, which is a cell cleanse, not our general detoxers, purification that we generally think of through like the liver and digestive system. This one's actually clearing out the cells that are no longer working for us, but they're taking our energy. So that's where I began starting my protocols from, is identifying, looking at labs, then looking at that cleanse, that cell cleanse, which can be done through many different ways. But I also like to keep it simple, like a simple 4-week protocol. And then we get to dive deeper, because then your body has more energy to actually use everything else to move forward. So I hope this was helpful, and I'm not seeing any questions in chats or with you today, but thank you for joining me, and I will sign off until tomorrow. And again, going through the challenge that I put out there is 5 days. Since we're doing this in the evening, I'll be likely starting tomorrow. Sugar, cutting out sugar, or if there's something else for you that's maybe of more importance, maybe it's dairy, wheat, gluten specifically, corn, soy, something that maybe is like your weak link that you do better without it. But there just hasn't been a push. Take this as your push and see what can you take out for 5 days and see how that impacts your system and how you feel, and to boost that energy. And it's free, right? We're not eating something specifically, so it doesn't cost you anything. And then the other one that you, depending on the time that you can start today, is going outside at least 5 minutes, or getting movement outside would be that next step. So check in with me, post your comments. I'll have this posted on Facebook, or I'll leave it up on Facebook as well, and I'll put the recording in. So take care for now, and welcome on this 5-day challenge of learning and taking action.